The provincial government will try again to push through legislation forcing college faculty back to work, ending a month-long strike. We're live at Queen's Park, where the NDP will continue to block that move. Good afternoon. The Liberals are going to try to table back-to-work legislation for a second time this afternoon. The New Democrats say they will not allow the government to easily do that. The best-case scenario for students is that classes would resume next Monday, 5 weeks after the strike began. CTV's Paul Bliss is following this story from Queen's Park, where a rare Friday sitting of the legislature going to take place this afternoon, Paul. Now, debate in the legislature, we already know, won't change a thing. It's just going to delay passage. So one might ask, why not get on with it?
Well, every party has a right to ask for debate under procedure, Ken, and the NDP have decided that this is their policy. They support Labour. They support a collective bargaining agreement reached under negotiation, not imposed in terms of a back-to-work legislation order and sent to mediation. Usually MPPs on a Friday are scattered across the province by now, back in their home ridings and through the weekend. But as you mentioned, on rare occasions, they're brought back for emergency and urgent sessions.
First thing this morning, the Premier faced questions about her back-to-work legislation. When will students be back in class?
We need to get these young people back into school. Unfortunately, the NDP is dragging this out, and so, my hope is that everyone will come to their senses and we'll have the NDP working with us today, because if we can get the legislation passed today, then everybody can be back in school on Monday.
This story is now about process and procedure, something usually considered boring and dry. Here's one potential timetable for the passing of back-to-work legislation. Today, the House reconvenes at 3 p.m. If the NDP continue to oppose the bill, the House will be recalled again for a rare Saturday session at 1 p.m. Then, possibly Sunday, to continue the debate. And it is possible to pass the bill on Sunday. Return to school for students, date unknown, but potentially early next week.
The last time the NDP opposed back-to-work legislation in a teacher's strike, it took 4 days to get the students back into class. In this case, the NDP say this law could be passed by Sunday.
NDP leader Andrea Horwath says do not blame her, blame the Liberals for allowing the strike to drag on for 5 weeks. Here's why the NDP opposed the back-to-work hammer.
But New Democrats have a solid commitment to workers, and we believe in workers' rights, and we don't think that taking workers' rights away is the right thing to do.
The collective bargaining process is important. I think that it's a principled process, and we need to support it. But I believe that this went on too long. I believe that there are some structural things we have to look at so that we're not ever confronted with such a long strike again.
The Liberals have a majority, so they can pass any laws they wish. And while there will be some pushback by the NDP, it's likely schools will reopen early next week, barring any surprises.
Well, the NDP are making an effort to point out the Liberals do have a majority, so they don't need unanimous consent to get this bill passed, saying that it should be passed on Sunday. The NDP want the Liberals to tell colleges to get ready right now for a rapid return of students. Ken?
Paul, just one thing. What does the legislation call for? Does it just send them back to work, or is there forced mediation or arbitration? What happens?
That's a good question. It calls for all outstanding issues to be put on hold and moved over into binding mediation arbitration. So essentially, everything agreed upon will stay agreed upon, and they're going to meet with sort of a labor judge who's going to sit there, listen to both sides, render a decision based on a midway what's fair, and say this will be binding. You'll both have to abide by this, whatever ruling the judge comes to. That's included in the legislation being tabled again today.
All right. Thank you, Paul.
You're welcome.
So even if the legislation does go through this weekend, the union says the teachers are not going to be ready for students on Monday. CTV's John Musselman is following that side of this story. John?
Hi, Ken. We're outside George Brown College. There is a sense of relief from students here that they could be back next week. But as Paul has mentioned, there could be some issues here. We're hearing from the union that because of the lost time, the semester would have to be condensed. And it may not be business as usual next week when students come back here.
By the time they get back into the classroom, it'll be 5 weeks. Students have been missing out on learning opportunities. They've been missing out on speaking with their professors and instructors and working with their colleagues as well. They've been in the middle of this two-sided negotiation, and they haven't had a seat at the table. So yeah, students are extremely frustrated, but I think relieved that they're finally getting back to the classroom on Monday if everything goes according to plan.
It's not a simple matter of just going back and looking at your course outline and saying, oh, condense these 5 weeks. I mean, we're looking at nursing programs, apprenticeship programs, and if the colleges, as they say, need to maintain academic control, then it's really up to them to provide the direction about how we're supposed to make up this work in each of those courses that we teach.
And there's no doubt students are also wondering that as well because of the time missed. How will they condense all of this? But we should say most of the students we talked to here this morning are relieved that at least they know that they'll be back here next week. But many aren't happy with the Premier, with the College Employer Council, and even the faculty.
Well, first of all, the colleges should have done the vote week 1. If they weren't ready to bargain and if they weren't ready to negotiate, they should have said, you know what, we're just going to do the vote instead of waiting it out 5 weeks and then having the Liberal government step in. And for Kathleen Wynne to say, you know, I'm just going to let it all happen out, you know, for me, I feel like it's pretty calculated for the election next year.
They were finally relieved. Like, they are coming back on the track and they have started taking things up. Like, they have started doing their assignments, and finally there is something that is consuming them up.
And I'm happy that we are going back to college by next week. Like, there's a possibility of going back to college next week.
So again, we've talked to a lot of students here today. They're actually getting prepared to return here next week. The question is, what day will that be? Reporting live outside George Brown, I'm John Musselman. I'll send it back to you.
Thank you, John.